In painting, we have two kinds of perspective that we need to pay attention to. We have the linear perspective and we have the aerial perspective. And oddly, the aerial perspective seems to confuse people. But it's very simple. Things change. When we say things change, let's get that a little bit more specific. What actually changes in aerial perspective? I want to add this to it. You can't get aerial perspective as long as you're looking for aerial perspective. You need to look for things that are specific to aerial perspective. And then that takes away the mystery of it. So what changes in aerial perspective? Think about what those two words mean. Aerial refers to air. Perspective is your viewpoint or your point of view. So in your viewpoint, let's look at size first. The size of things are going to change. How do they change? Things that are closer to you, say this tree right here, will, or things that are like that tree, will be smaller, get smaller gradually as they move into distance. Now let's just illustrate that. We're just going to illustrate. I'm not going to do a demonstration for you, but I'm just going to illustrate these points to show you how you can look for these things and then make them work for you in your painting. So, well, first of all, let's put just a little bit of a boundary here, and something kind of like this. Get just a little bit more. There we go, like that. All right, what does that mean? Way back here, something that is this size, which would be, let's just put it down here. Let's say that a tree that this size, or a group of trees that are that size, I might interpret as this size right here. Something like that. Now, as that same size tree moves into distance, when it gets about halfway down or halfway up our canvas, which would be about halfway up the scene we're looking at, it shrinks in size. And how much does it shrink in size? Well, it depends on how close it is to us. But you can measure that. You can simply take your paintbrush or your pencil. You close one eye. You can hold it in front of you. You measure the top of the tree closest to you, the top of the tree closest to you. Have the top of your pencil or your paintbrush aligned with the top of the tree, and have the bottom aligned with the bottom of the tree. All right, then you can, holding that at the same distance from your eye, you can just move it and you can see the next tree beside it where it fits in this space. You'll discover you'll discover various things depending on how close the trees that are behind are to you. Well, if we're doing that here, represented by this tree, if we're doing that here, and I put line the top of my paintbrush with the top of this little group of trees, I line my finger at the bottom of those little group of trees, and I take my brush and I put it right here beside this group of trees, it's a little less than half the size. So the size changes as it moves in the distance. The other things change too. I'm going to address one at a time, because this seems to be confusing people. Now, where is that? This would be right here, and I'll just locate. Where is that in space? It's not here, it's not here. Maybe it's about right here, and then I would just put that same, or I would check the shape that I'm looking at, but I'd put that right here and make that about half the size of this one. So this is about half the size. Let's get a little bit more paint on that brush. There we go, right there. Now that's about half the size. Now I'm just working with size. Now there are other things we'll take in consideration, but I'm just working with size. Now watch it. As it goes into distance, as it moves further back, those same height of trees get even smaller. And so when we would go further back, which goes, as you interpret space, you interpret the higher up on the canvas it is, the further back it is. And so as it would go higher, then it would be even smaller. So we could indicate something that would be even smaller. And then way back in the distance there, they just look like little dots. The trees just look like little dots. And so way in the distance there, you're just dealing with little dots, something like that. So size is one thing that's going to change as things move into distance. Other things are going to change. Value contrast. That's one that seems to stump people. So before I go into what happens with value contrast, let me just show you what I'm talking about. Value by itself is meaningless unless you connect with it either the word contrast or the word similarity. So two values together mean something. One value by itself doesn't mean anything. So a value's relationship is going to depend upon how much contrast there is between two values. So let's look at that first. A strong value contrast, let's put that right here. A dark, extreme dark, as dark as you can go, next to a light as you can go and still show color. Well, you could go to white too, but that is a strong value contrast. You will only see strong value contrast up close in this frontal plane, in these planes that are closest to you. That's where the value contrast is going to be the strongest. So what does it mean then if a value contrast changes? What it means is that dark is going to get just a little bit lighter. So I'll go into another value, and this value is a little bit lighter. You can see it's not much lighter, but it's a little bit lighter, and that changes the value contrast. So that value against the same value here, those two side by side are a narrower contrast, and we can take those values even closer and have a closer value contrast, and that gets into value similarities. I like to think of all of them as contrast and just the degree of contrast. So if we have as it goes in away distance, you're going to find those darks are going to get even lighter. And so if we have a lighter value, so we have one the strongest, a little bit lighter, and then lighter there. If we put the same light beside it, we have a different kind of value contrast right here. And then as things get into the distance, we won't see in the furthest distance, we won't see any or very little value contrast. So we might have something like this. We might have the darks, at least even that light, and then the lights themselves might remain the same in value or similar in value. So we have, this is still contrast. This is a very shallow or very narrow contrast, very close contrast. This is a very strong contrast. So as things move into distance, the value contrast changes. So you can look for that. And then when you look for it, you can paint it. What else changes? Edges. What is this about edges? A very sharp edge. You'll only see edges defined precisely. I'll get right up here for that. You can only see edges defined precisely on things up close to you. So in here, let me get that just a little bit more defined. And they won't all be defined precisely, but the sharper edges are going to appear closer to you. So by the sharper edge, I mean that the edge is simply clean and doesn't feel blended. As things move into distance, those edges get softer. So what does that mean? That means I'm going to do a little bit of something here. If we have in the distance, say we have something like this, which I'll talk about in just a moment. And then let's say if we have in the distance, we would have maybe a little sky above that. Let's just check that out right here. So say something like that. The horizon between the horizon between this area and the sky needs to be slightly blended in order for that to fill in the distance. And so the way you would do that is to simply take, well, there's a couple of ways, but one of the better ways to do that is simply take a dry brush and give it just sort of touch those edges just a little bit. If the paint's still wet, you just touch those edges and you see then you have them more blended in the distance. Same thing is true for the images that we see in distance. If you see trees in the distance that might have, there we go, trees in the distance that where you might be able to see a little bit of value contrast. Let's put just a little light there. There we go. So there's a little light in that one. Those edges are going to be slightly blended, and you can look for that in nature. This is not just a rule that somebody made up. This is an observation of nature. So photographs don't show that quite so well, but if you're out in nature, you'll notice it, and especially you'll notice it in your paintings. If you create things that are moving into the far distance that have the edges too sharp, then it's not going to look right. It's going to look out of sync. So edges in the distance are going to be soft. Simply means they're blended. So that's about edges. What about textures? Textures are sometimes ignored because people don't know what to do with textures. Textures simply mean that you can see the little details in things. So something that's up close to us like this, we might be able to see the textures of the light that's shining on that tree. So we might be able to see more definitively. See, I see the light, we're looking down, so the light above, we might be able to see those textures more definitively. Something like that. If it were really close to us, we might see each individual leaf. That's texture. So, but as things move in the distance, the texture goes away. So the areas that are in here would have very little texture anymore, and that too is created by that those close value contrast. So a tree that let's get that a little bit more definitive. A tree that might be this close to us might have the light pretty strong, right like that, and here like that, sort of off. Now that's texture. That same tree, as it would grade into size in the distance, won't show that texture. You won't really see the texture. You'll just see the pattern of light. Let's put the dark in first. Let's go right in here, and let's just make this one a little bit bigger so we can show that. All right, so this might be the tree we're talking about. In more of the distance, you will see a difference, a little bit difference in the value contrast, but you no longer see the texture, and so you just show a little difference in the value contrast as that gets into further distance. There we go, right in there, something like that. It's very subtle, and the further in the distance it is, the less texture it's going to have. When you get into the distance really far away, you won't see any texture at all. You can see it right here, and you can also see, if you watch the landscape, things in the real distance are not going to have any texture. So that's sort of a gradation of texture. And then color. Now, people make rules about what happens to color as things move in the distance in aerial perspective. Here you actually see here that the atmosphere is blending with the colors, and the greens here are actually getting cooler. They're getting bluer as they move into distance. You might not always see that, but what you will see as things move, the color as it moves in the distance is going to get lighter. So you're going to see some sort of gradation. So it might happen something like this. And I'm thinking of the overall color, everything that's in the scene, but something like this that might be, let's get just a little bit of an indication here of what you might see in front. You might see some sort of strong intensity or stronger intensity, and you will see certainly some strong value contrast, textural stuff up close. But then as that moves into distance, it's going to get lighter. I'm going to go up just a little bit here with the green. It's going to get lighter. It's going to lose some of its intensity. Look for that, and that simply means that green, if it's green or any color, it's going to turn a little bit less green and a little bit more gray. So this kind of thing might be going on right like this, and then it might reach a point where it begins to change and begin to get a little bit bluer. And as that happens, it's going to get lighter. So this is beginning to have a little atmosphere coming right in here as it moves up. And you might see, the thing is not to make rules and not to believe rules when you hear them from other people. The thing to do is to look for it. See, this is, as it's getting up in here, it's getting a whole lot lighter and a whole lot cooler. But if you don't see that, you don't superimpose it. But these are things for you to look for. You can see now we've got the actual color changing in value and changing, in this case, changing in hue, green to blue, and changing in intensity, which is a brighter green to a duller green or a duller blue. And of course, if you go out west, you're going to have a different sort of thing to look at, where you don't have the greens, where you have more of the earth colors. So I say don't believe rules, but if you look for these things, then allow your subject or your whatever you're looking at to tell you what you're seeing, instead of you deciding what you're going to see, which a lot of people do. Look at the various things I pointed out here and allow your seeing to tell you what you're seeing. What is your, as things change, let your seeing tell you how are the sizes changing, how is the value contrast changing, how are the edges changing, how are the textures changing, and how are the colors changing. Those are just 5 little things that you need to remember there. And as an artist, you might consider those 5 tools that you need to have with you right up here all the time, so you'll know how to look for them. Hope you enjoyed this quick tip. If you have questions or a suggestion for a quick tip, leave us a comment right down here in the YouTube comment box. And take a trip over to DianneMize.com and look at all the things we have there for you, including full-length video tutorials. And while you're there, sign up for our newsletter so you'll always be informed of our latest adventures. And thanks for watching.